I'm Hartwig Fischer, Director of the British Museum, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's Era of Reclamation talk. I invited Bonnie Greer to curate a project, and together we identified reclamation as a prevalent theme of our era. This is also an opportunity to listen and to learn as we move towards the great transformation of the British Museum.
I'm going to ask each of you, and people, and whoever can start, but you all got to answer. What is diversity, and what does it mean to you?
Before I say what I think it is or what it is to me, it should be for institutions that think they're diverse or want to become more diverse. It should be more than a declaration. It should be an actual demonstration. So that's really important. What it means to me that you are reflecting either the communities you're within, the country that you're in, those diverse communities should be represented within your the context of your galleries and what you display as much as possible. Showing them information about themselves. They want to see things about themselves and their culture. There should also be, in terms of diversity, representation and diverse communities within museums and cultural institutions that on their staff. There's a lot about this at the moment, and that's one of the reasons why we're here, that diversity is key to everything. More productivity within institutions, better collaborations, and you're seen outside of walls such as the British Museum or the Natural History Museum where I work. You will be seen in a better light if you reflect what is going on outside around you.
I'm coming from a French background, so it's going to be a bit blunt. When somebody says diversity, for me it means less racist. So we want to be diverse, it means you are racist and you want to appear to be less racist. So you're going to hire somebody and it's going to be that one person who's going to carry the load, do the emotional labor, and yeah. Sorry.
I like that.
So what I've learned in these last few years is that it's really important once you start to diversify that it's a verb, it's about the work. Whenever you are in an institution and a certain group is not there, you are unaware of what's important to that group. So once they start coming in, you need to change yourself. Look at yourself from a different angle, from the angle that the new group is bringing in. And then you are diversifying, then you are changing. But I promise that it'll be completely different from what it was before. And I think that's when we've done a good job.
People talk to me about decolonizing museums and universities. What does that mean, and how do you do that?
For me, decolonizing is a word that is so widely, that has so many definitions depending on people that it becomes really hard to have one set. So I'm going to speak just for myself. I consider that we can talk about decolonizing only when we understand colonization. And if you don't understand colonization, decolonizing takes on a different meaning, which is a very contemporary now meaning. Whereas for me, if you go back and you look at the history of colonization, British Empire, French Empire, Portuguese Empire, all these stuff, we don't necessarily have time, but we have a few stories. If you do understand this history of oppression, then you also understand that it stood alongside a history of resistance that is incredibly important for me. The history of resistance is the history of anti-colonization or anti-colonial history. If you understand those two histories, it's impossible to react as a colonizer, 21st century colonizer. So it seems to me that decolonizing has to go back in time and has to look at what has been learned from our ancestors and then bring it back to the 21st century and see how we have constantly been resisting, surviving, and even thriving. And from there, you can teach about not necessarily removing what exists, but actually creating that space where there's a narrative that is an alternative narrative that sits alongside other narratives.
What I want to say, ask for Lika, and what's interesting about the Dutch, because we don't talk about the Dutch a lot, especially in this part of the world, that we do talk about Elmina, because Elmina was controlled by the Dutch. And your museum, the Reich Museum, is, first of all, not only the sort of great exhibition place for one of the greatest artists in Western art, Rembrandt, but also it is a combination of the Natural History Museum. It is a combination of the National Gallery. It is a monstrous institution in the Netherlands itself. It is huge. It's a huge operation. And you're there, and you're doing this a show in a land where people still black up their faces and walk around, and you gotta fight them to get that off. How do you function? How are you doing that? I don't know what else to say.
What we're constantly struggling with is what the museum fears, that the visitor who doesn't know anything about colonial history, how that visitor will react. Because the visitor will be relates to a national history in which he thinks slavery did not form part of that. To take that National Museum and do a slavery exhibition is then a very, very big challenge.
Yeah.
So I'm learning through colleagues who constantly ask me questions from that perspective. And the beautiful thing I think about it is that we get to ask new questions, not just the concepts that have been developed in Black academia, in African American academia. I can bring that in, but they in turn ask me questions that I have never thought about before. So I think we're gonna be able to go deeper into this history, because it is world history from the perspective of what the European must have experienced in that period. So these are questions about responsibility, about what did they know, about could they even imagine what life must have been like for enslaved people, did they have a choice, to what point? And I think those are not questions that I would ask, so it's important to bring all of that together, and together we can write a new parts of world history.
What needs to be reclaimed in relation to Black history? What aspect of it is missing, lost, ignored? What are we in search of now?
Well, what I'd love for us to do is what I've become more and more passionate about. I work at two institutions. The one is in historiography, and we use a lot of written sources. The other is a museum, and we use mainly objects. And what I miss in all of this is what I was used to that was normal in the Caribbean, where I come from, is the oral sources and immaterial heritage, because through that, those forms of heritage, you come to insights in the past that you'll never reach through the objects or through the written sources. You come to so much more than that material heritage. The material heritage will bring you to the stories about the wealth and the power, and about mainly masculine power as well. But if you go through the oral sources, you will find the stories of people who were enslaved, how they felt about it, whether they felt human or dehumanized, how they went about it, how they came to be warriors, how they came to resist, in what ways. And those are the stories that we have not heard enough about. And the strong part is also that it's not just about that romanticized version of power and wealth and the big monuments we see here. It's about the experience of being human in every sense of the way. And I think that's so much more powerful and something that's been missing all over, that I think that's what we should strive for now.
Thank you.
Yeah, off the back of that, I totally agree with what you said. And we, within those stories, it is all about being human. It's all about us connecting with those stories. And you know, there needs to be more. The reason why some of these oral histories have not been teased out before, it's all about where institutions place the value on these things, and if the value is just totally in objects, well, it's only got one kind of meaning, one kind, or you know, in a certain kind of connection. But you can get such a much more rich connection to objects and other things with the oral histories. You know, the oral histories and stories are also things that have been, you know, stories that have been passed down through generations as well, that tell you about generations of people, and investigate whether those stories are still told in certain communities now worldwide. Things like that can offer so much dynamics to you know, things and stories and objects within cultural institutions. So, yeah, I do believe it's all about the value, and that has been missing as part of it all.
For me, of course, I completely agree. I look at the way we teach history, and I think that, going back to your point, it's not just about the monument and all the rest of it. I look at the history. I teach history through memory, and through memory, you also look at things that are important to certain communities. Food, for example, how you tell a story through food. It's a story of resistance. It's a beautiful story that completely changes the way you look at colonial history, and the legacies of the past. So there's that, for me, that needs to be reclaimed. But there's also the fact that we always tell, not always, but we often tell these days Black British history through white history. It's mediated by Western history. How about intercultural history? How about the history between Black people and people of Asian descent? How about the city community that has been in India for the last 300 years? That's a Black history as well. So I would like to see that reclaimed as well, not always through the kind of story Black-white slavery. Because 21st century Britain is a beautiful story of intercultural that is not Black and white, but Black and Asian, and all sort of combination as well.
Thank you all. Just,